Dan Markel was born in Canada of devout Jewish parents. In early education, he was actually not doing so well. He was too rambunctious and mischievous to concentrate on studies. By high school, Dan proved himself to be an excellent debater, and this ultimately led to his choice of majoring in law. He had a double major of politics and philosophy at Harvard University and graduated magna cum laude. He went to Israel for a year to further his studies. He got a master's degree in political theory from Emmanuel College in Cambridge, and then went back to Harvard to finish off his law degree. He worked in Washington, D.C. as an associate lawyer in a firm that specialized in criminal defense. Dan comes up Gemini rising. The Adelsons are a family of dentists. Donna and Harvey Adelson are the parents of Robert, Charlie, and Wendi. Harvey Adelson started the family business of dentistry. Donna, the matriarch of the family, got a degree in early childhood education. She taught kindergarten and was a substitute teacher, and then joined her husband's dental practice as a bookkeeper and office manager. She's sociable, loved to entertain, volunteered at their local synagogue, and wanting to give her children every opportunity in life, had them involved in extracurricular activities such as sports, music, and art. Donna's chart comes up Capricorn rising. Donna is described as controlling and wearing the pants in the family. Robert, the eldest, went into sinus surgery and rhinoplasty in New York. Charlie went into dentistry and specialized in periodontics, dental aesthetics, and implants. He also bought out his father's company and employed him. There were only 2 dentists in the company, Charlie and his father. Charlie was a dentist who made house calls. He would travel to other dental offices to do specialized dentistry, including surgery, as well as run the family dentistry business. The business later changed hands back to Father Harvey. Charlie comes up Aquarius rising. Wendi, the youngest and only girl of the Adelsons, was pretty, outgoing, and quirky. She graduated from high school as valedictorian. She earned several Fulbright scholarships, including the Bill Gates Scholarship that is only awarded to 1% of applicants. She graduated magna cum laude and earned her master's degree in international relations on her first scholarship. She did an internship in Washington, D.C., and then earned a law degree at the University of Miami on her second scholarship. Wendi comes up Aries rising. Both she and Charlie have Jupiter in or conjunct the 4th. They came from a well-to-do family. Dan went on a Jewish matchmaking site called J-Date, where he met law student Wendi Adelson. Wendi's mother, Donna, encouraged her to meet this nice Jewish lawyer. Donna thought this man was a good choice for Wendi, but Wendi said she wasn't physically attracted to him.
Before getting married to Mr. Markel in, was it 2006?
2006 we got married.
Isn't it true that you've stated that you knew on your fancy wedding day, when you were all dolled up and feeling like you were an actor in someone else's show, you knew it on your honeymoon when you were enjoying the vacation but not thrilled to be there with him, you said, "I'm not sure I liked him, let alone loved him, but I was eager to start a life with someone and he wanted to do it with me." You recall saying that?
I don't recall saying that, no.
I have placed in front of you what's been previously marked as Defendant's Exhibit 1B for identification purposes.
I thought I could cheat the system and marry a man I lacked passionate love for because, hey, didn't that die anyway during marriage?
At the time they met, Wendi was 24 and Dan was 31. Dan courted Wendi, and when they got close, he told Wendi of his aspiration to become a law professor. He would be taking a big cut in pay. But as a supportive girlfriend, Wendi didn't have any qualms about it.
He decided to go to teach, and me, like most fathers would say, why don't you practice law for 10 years, put a chunk in the bank, and then go teach? But he wouldn't hear from that.
Dan and Wendi then became engaged. He moved to Miami to be with Wendi, where she and her family resided. He interviewed for at least 2 jobs in Miami. One was for the University of Miami, where Wendi was enrolled. He applied for a law professor, but didn't get it. Then he interviewed for a lawyer position. Jeff Lacasse, a boyfriend of Wendi's after she and Dan split, and a colleague of both of them, said Dan lost the Miami attorney position.
Yeah, he was so abrasive. I'm sure you know a lot about that. He was so abrasive that they're like, "You're a great scholar. We don't want to put up with your butt every day, so get out of here." You know, correct. He had to work pretty hard to lose that job. She never, you guys know the background. She never wanted to be here ever. I mean, she came here with Markel. They're supposed to be here a year, then move on. He had a job at Miami. He was an asshole, so he lost it. He said, "No, go back to FSU and stay there." They're stuck here.
Eventually, Dan attained a position as an assistant professor at Florida State University in Tallahassee. He took a major pay cut, and without even consulting Wendi, he negotiated that the university employ her as well after she graduated from law school. This irritated Wendi because this was a spousal hire, as if she needed connections to get a job.
Wendi hated that her job at FSU came as part of a spousal hire. To her, it felt like a footnote, not an accomplishment.
The job was a contract position as an adjunct professor at half or less the salary of Dan.
I think in this situation, Mr. Markel's income was twice or so Wendi's, and his assets, from what I understand, including the non-marital assets, were more substantial than Ms. Adelson's.
It was essentially a temp job in which she could only work if the university received grant money to pay her. She would not be eligible for tenure. This is a job hugely beneath her talents and something she never aspired to anyway. Instead of being allowed to spread her wings and realize her full valedictorian, multiple scholarship, magna cum laude, lawyer potential, she was restricted to that of a law professor, just like Dan. They got married on February 26, 2006.
So he was pretty mean to her. And as she went to get married, every friend she had was begging her, "Don't marry this guy. He's the biggest asshole we've ever met." And she got caught up in the Harvard law and elitism and all this kind of stuff. And she was in a bad place. Made a bad decision, got married to a guy.
Since Dan came from a devout Jewish family and his parents invited rabbis to the wedding, Donna was told to have kosher food served. But she didn't do this detail, and the attendees had to be told in the middle of the meal that the food was not kosher. The rabbis excused themselves and left. Donna asked Ruth Markel, Dan's mother, why she and her husband Phil insisted on kosher when they themselves didn't even eat kosher.
Why is Danny so kosher? You're not even that kosher. And she already had started to move towards that as kind of a bit of a divisive issue.
Wendi discovered she didn't like living in Tallahassee, 7 hours away from her family in Miami. She was used to the hustling, big city life of Miami and didn't like the slow-paced, unsophisticated, small-town southern feel of Tallahassee. Donna often said Wendi lived in Alabama. Dan promised Wendi he would eventually find another job and they would move away from Tallahassee. But in the meantime, he wanted to start a family. They had 2 sons and lived in a large house in an upscale neighborhood. After 5 years, Dan gained tenure and was promoted to a full-fledged law professor. Dan worked 2 days a week.
He only taught 2 days a week, right?
Yes.
And
as with most college schedules, Dan probably taught all his classes on Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and Thursday. That gave him 5 days off with plenty of time on his hands. He had the occasional out-of-town speeches and other business engagements. He would go to the gym and frequently visit his sons at daycare.
Yeah, he's the only dad I've ever met who would go to his kids' preschool daily just to have snack with them. I mean, he loved them that much.
Yes, absolutely.
Even when it was your time to have the children, he would go to their preschool and visit with them there?
Yes.
Wendi also worked 2 days a week.
I mean, Wendi, she's a clinical instructor at the law school. She teaches 2 days a week from 12 to 2, 10 to 2, something like that. And she has tasks to do. She works. She has an awful lot of flexibility in her schedule. From 9 to 5, I wouldn't know what she was doing most days, you know.
Dan's career flourished at Florida State University, and he was able to make all his dreams come true. In the meantime, Wendi was stuck with the kids, still had that podunk job at the university Dan foisted on her, and was living in a place she didn't like.
From the outside, it looked picture perfect. Inside, though, resentment was building. Dan's career was taking off, while Wendi felt stuck, overlooked, isolated, and carrying most of the weight at home. With no family nearby for support, she felt her own ambitions slipping away.
After the boys were born, Wendi claimed Dan became a religious zealot.
Okay, keep going.
Mr. Markel has become a religious zealot over the last few years since the birth of our first son.
He insisted that his sons eat kosher food, which had to be made separately, and special accommodations were made at the daycare school for the kids to have kosher meals.
And then, Dan changed in ways Wendi hadn't expected. Once their boys were born, he leaned deeper into his Jewish faith, adopting stricter Orthodox practices. He switched himself and the kids to a fully kosher diet. Wendi wanted no part of it, which meant separate meals at home and even special arrangements at school. What looked like stability from the outside was, in reality, a growing divide. Wendi couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the life she'd signed up for. While Dan's career thrived, teaching, publishing, traveling, her world felt smaller and lonelier.
Wendi and her family were never on board with all this kosher business, and she had to make separate meals of kosher and non-kosher. Separate pots and pans had to be used for kosher food, and the pans had to be placed away from the regular food and pots and pans.
Ever since Dan became more Orthodox and he started eating kosher, the couple had to have separate places to prepare and store their food. Their kitchen had dedicated places where Dan would have all his kosher meat, and he even ate on different plates. Dan insisted the boys be fed tofu hot dogs at preschool so they didn't feel left out when there were no kosher meats available.
Yeah, that would be.
But he was more observant of kosher rules than I was.
Okay, and can you explain for the jury what those imply for those of us
Sure.
that don't know?
So keeping kosher has to do with separating milk from meat, something like you can't eat a cheeseburger. And it has to do with the ritual way that animals are killed. So certain meats would be considered kosher or non-kosher. And then things like shellfish are not allowed, or pork would not be allowed. And so his beliefs changed over time. We used to have bacon, and then bacon became a no later on.
All right, and those rules were something that he was wanting to impose on the children, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you were less interested in those kosher rules?
It was less important to me.
And you mentioned keeping the boys kosher. Was Wendi Adelson required that the boys keep kosher?
That I don't know. I think there were some issues about that.
In the marriage settlement agreement, was that required?
No.
It soon became evident Dan was not going to seek another job elsewhere so they could leave Tallahassee, and he had relegated Wendi's main responsibility to the caretaking of the children. Wendi also believed Dan indoctrinated the children in the Orthodox Jewish traditions and culture.
Okay, what does she say about the schooling opportunities for the boys in South Florida?
He's indoctrinating them, not teaching them. If he truly cared about religious school for them, then clearly one of the 37 Hebrew day schools in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County would be a better choice for our boys.
Since there were no Jewish schools in Tallahassee that taught children about their Jewish heritage, as there were in Miami and surrounding areas, Dan took it upon himself to homeschool his children in the customs and traditions of their religion. They also weekly celebrated Shabbat in Dan's home with another couple. Wendi said after the last child was born, the marriage dissolved.
Our marriage dissolved after the children arrived, as the loneliness of being married to someone that didn't view me as an equal crept in.
She complained Dan emotionally neglected her. She existed to caretake their children, do the low-paying job Dan got her, never spread her wings and realize her full potential as a lawyer, and forever live in Tallahassee. She was there to serve him. When she complained of living in Tallahassee, he tried to do things to appease her, such as sending her flowers. But these were empty gestures that didn't resolve anything. Nothing changed, and everything stayed exactly as he liked it. Perhaps Dan thought if Wendi got a lawyer job in private practice, she would upstage him, make more money, have more prestige.
In the marriage, there seemed to be a competitive element. Dan Markel was a tenured professor. Wendi was not a tenured professor.
You know, things that maybe at first she thought she could live with, it kind of became clear how unhappy it was making her.
She felt that she was being asked to keep the home while he engaged in his professional pursuits. And she felt that was holding her back, in fact.
Since he didn't need to be competing with his wife, Dan kept her under his thumb. It was entirely possible Dan married Wendi for surrogate services because of her stupendous genes. Wendi had been valedictorian, earned multiple scholarships, none of which Dan accomplished, and her attractiveness didn't hurt. To mix her colossal genes with his would create the most remarkable children. But after the children had been born, Wendi had served her purpose. She could either cater to Dan in a traditional submissive wifey role or stay out of the way.
Despite her own impressive career, Wendi says that Dan was constantly belittling her achievements.
Now, what were some of the issues, if you remember, that she told you they were having?
He was becoming very, very religious. There was becoming issues with diet and how she was cooking in the house. She wasn't really respectful he wasn't really respectful of her career. He would belittle her. He obviously seemed like he lost his eye for her, and she seemed like she'd lost his eye for him, and she wasn't happy.
Wendi became frustrated at her inability to express her unhappiness in their marriage because Dan would debate off any grievances she had, effectively stonewalling her. This would shut down any further discussion, and everything would go back to the way it was. There was much that was made of Dan's faithfulness to Wendi, but the likely reality was he did not want to give her any reason for a divorce. A divorce generally gives the mother primary custody of the children. To tear his kids away from him was a knife in the heart. Dan told her if she ever left him, she would never see the kids again, and she would be penniless.
She had been talking to him for a long time about her unhappiness, thinking about divorce. He told her that, if she ever did that, she'd never see her kids again, she'd be penniless.
So he was not hearing of divorce and would return to his loveless marriage. They did try marriage counseling for 6 months, but to no avail. He refused to compromise on anything. He was overbearing and thwarted her every move.
Danny thinks he's a very important person, and as always, he and his needs come first.
He refused to allow her to divorce him. Wendi had to plan an escape. One day, on a business trip at NYU to give speeches, Dan confided in a colleague that he thought his marriage was in trouble because Wendi had not answered any of his calls that day. The man advised Dan to work on his marriage. In the meantime, Wendi was busy packing. Her family came over to help her, and a moving van was called. Wendi took half of what was in the house and half of the money in their joint accounts. She left divorce papers on their bed. She had rented a house in Miami where she and the children would be staying. Then she called Dan.
I see Dan in New York, and he's telling me that he thinks his marriage is unwinding. She seems disengaged, fairly depressed.
she had a plan. She was going to book moving trucks, fill out divorce papers, and then she was going to take her 2 boys and get the hell out of Tallahassee.
She told him the marriage was over and she was leaving him. Dan canceled his speeches at NYU and took the first plane to Tallahassee. When he arrived home, he found it abandoned, with half the furniture gone. The children's beds and clothes were gone, and all that remained was old clothing they had outgrown. When Dan was able to reach Wendi, he begged her to take him back.
For probably a year after it happened, he was focused on just trying to win her back in some way.
He found Wendi and bought flowers and kneeled before her, asking her to take him back. And she said no.
He did everything he could until she said, absolutely no chance I'm ever coming back.
He said he'd quit his job and move to Miami if that's what it took for her to come back. But Wendi was not so naive. She knew he wanted to know where she was located so he could come by and pick up the kids. She refused to tell him her location for 4 months. Within 3 months' time, Wendi was offered a much higher paid job in the private sector, working as an attorney. She was offered $1 million by a law firm that sued drug companies.
Gary is a lawyer that he's the one that offered Wendi the job so she could relocate in the summer of 2013. He runs a tort firm suing drug companies. He offered her $1 million job.
Dan pleaded with Wendi to return, and when she wouldn't, he told her he was going to use his skills as a lawyer to fight back. First, Dan tried to have Wendi on a federal kidnapping charge because she wouldn't tell him where the kids were. That didn't work.
He also tried to have her prosecuted on a federal kidnapping charge because she refused to tell him where she was living. Dan felt that he had the right to know where his boys were every minute.
A vicious divorce battle ensued. In court, Dan accused Wendi of stealing from him and demanded to know Wendi's location so he could go through her place and take all the items he claimed she stole. But this was denied.
He accused Wendi of taking his tennis racket, which was kind of petty, but he did this with other frivolous items as well. And he demanded that the court give him access to Wendi's home, wherever that was, so he could go in there and find everything she had taken. But of course, this was denied.
Dan tried to prove Wendi was an unfit mother by claiming she was deceitful. She stole things from him. She defrauded him by not reporting an inheritance asset given to her and wasn't trustworthy. He said she stole a family heirloom ring that belonged to the Markel family without disclosing the ring in question was Wendi's wedding ring. Wendi responded that it was not part of the marital contract. Among the barrage of motions he filed, Dan gave an emotionally driven 23-page rant to the court, totally unprofessional, which went nowhere. His family law attorney threw up his hands and let Dan file whatever motion he wanted, since Dan insisted on having his own way.
And we could get his motions dismissed because they were frivolous.
His motions were either without legal foundation, frivolous, or improper requests. For example, Dan demanded that he get sole decision-making over the health, education, and religion for the children.
Up there, please.
Only an idiot like him would write that. He should be the only one consulted for making decisions regarding the health, education, and religion of his children.
Exactly. And then Mr. Markel had asked for sole decision-making, for example, because he was upset if the children didn't eat kosher or whatever his complaints were. So he wanted sole decision-making, which is extremely difficult to do. The only time a parent gets sole decision-making is if the other parent is just incapable of making decisions, like drug addicted or seriously mentally ill, something like that.
Thrown out. He claimed Wendi was not entitled to half the community property because she didn't contribute half.
He also requested for more than 50% of the marital assets because he said he earned more and he created the assets more than she did, which is not a valid legal position, and she got what appeared to be equal value of assets.
Of the marital estate.
Of the marital estate.
Dismissed. Dan claimed fraud on their divorce documents, saying that Wendi had not been truthful in her financial disclosure in the divorce petition in order to get Wendi and her lawyer disbarred.
He also, I think it was that pleading where he went on a little bit more about Wendi and how she should probably be disbarred from the practice of law, and that I should be disbarred from the practice of law. I think it was that one.
Many people thought that was going too far. Here is the prosecuting attorney at Donna's trial. She's supposed to be on Dan's side. But notice her surprised reaction upon reviewing Dan's motions against Wendi.
Unfortunately, the broken promises, communication withdrawal, and deceitful behavior indicate that the wife really cannot be trusted to consider the children's best interest. Did Dan Markel put this in his filing?
He did.
Because there are numerous false statements in the petition to relocate, and because the wife's behavior reveals deception, lack of integrity, and other instances of bad faith, this court should look at the wife as having unclean hands. Did he put that?
He did.
And this was sent to Donna Adelson?
Correct.
The wife, who unilaterally helped herself to $400,000 of assets she barely contributed to, and then it goes on, this court should award decision-making authority over education, medical, and religious matters solely to the husband. He didn't even want to consult Wendi on those matters?
He did not.
And he was asking the court to grant him sole decision-making over those 3 areas of his kids' lives, right?
That's correct.
The judge in the case saw Dan's legal onslaught as a complete waste of the court's time. The judge admonished Dan to stop filing his own frivolous motions and to allow his attorney to handle the matter.
I'm sorry, did Donna Adelson ever talk to you about Wendi and Dan Markel's divorce?
Some. I mean, the phrase that sticks in my head is that Danny was depoing Wendi to death. I wasn't involved with, all the various motions. I remember that phrase. I remember there being a lot of, court motions back and forth. But I remember that phrase. I remember, some complaints about like very long either mediation or depositions that Wendi had to endure.
The way Dan conducted himself, you wouldn't think you were dealing with a former attorney.
The judge read all of the pleadings, and she said that she was very unhappy with Professor Markel's pleadings. She did not like them. She thought they were a poke in my client's eye, and they were not appropriate, and she never wanted to see pleadings like this in front of her again, but she was going to allow the deposition.
Okay, so it's pretty contentious between the two of them?
Yeah, Danny was not very nice. I mean, I'm sorry he's dead, no one deserves this, but I don't know if you guys had a chance to read the court pleadings he filed, but they're almost insane. I mean, I have not read. You got to look at those. I mean, they are, it seems like an insane person.
Okay.
They're like this thick, and he tries to get Wendi disbarred, and he calls her name. I mean, it's the rantings of a lunatic, basically. But every time she got one of these, she would melt down for like 2 weeks. And he was constantly manipulating the legal system to keep her in stress, and it was punishing her very effectively.
After Wendi got the job offer, she petitioned the court to relocate the children to Miami. She wanted sole custody of the boys, advising she was offered a job in Miami and wanted to move them into her parents' home.
What is tab W?
Husband's reply to wife's memorandum of law in support of her petition to relocate to Coral Springs, Florida with the minor children.
And what does Dan say about the wife's pleadings?
The wife's pleadings are vague, filled with rank and obvious falsehoods, and the legal analysis is fundamentally inept.
Does he mention her parents as well related to this line of argument?
For the preceding reasons, the petition should be dismissed with prejudice and costs forwarded to the husband. Indeed, if the costs are not awarded, then wife and her affluent parents, who are bankrolling wife's litigation so that they can enjoy closer access to the grandchildren, will persist in vexatious and groundless litigation and thereby prevent the parents from reaching a space where they can cooperate, collaborate, and communicate effectively and warmly in the project of raising their wonderful children.
Dan filed for joint custody of the children, which he received. But the judge refused Wendy's request to relocate the children because unless Dan was mentally ill or abusive to them, she could not allow it.
What does she say to the friend about losing relocation?
Unfortunately, after paying a lawyer $600 an hour for 10 months of case preparation, the judge listened to Wendi testify for 1 hour. I'll do this. The judge took a break and asked one question. I'm not hearing about any physical abuse by the father. Has he been pulling out their toenails? When Wendi said no, the judge said, well, I've made up my mind. No physical abuse, no relocation.
She also stated that Wendi was banned from moving the boys away from Dan until they were 18. Because Wendi could not relocate the children, she gave up her high-paying job offer in Miami and moved back to Tallahassee.
At this point, you're kind of agreeing with him. You want to do it peacefully, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you talk about the one alternative is you could call Gary. Now, Gary is the gentleman who was kind of offering you a position in Miami, right?
Gary was a partner at the law firm where a position was offered to me.
Okay, and your plan was to have him come and testify at the relocation hearing about the job that he would be giving you if you relocated there, correct?
Yes.
And you had other people who were going to testify there as well on your behalf, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so you say one alternative is you call Gary and say, I've changed my mind. I don't think it's best for my kids to move them to South Florida. I appreciate you saving the job for me, but I'm not going to come to South Florida, correct?
Yes.
She returned to her old job at the college. It was there Dan would tell colleagues that Wendi stole from him, she drank every night, she was a pathological liar, and that she was mentally ill.
During the period of all this litigation, what were your feelings about Professor Markel?
I thought he was being a jerk. I mean, hearing stories that he's showing up at her work and bad-mouthing her to other colleagues and saying horrible things about her, I thought he was just being a jerk to her.
In the divorce split, Dan was ordered to pay Wendi half the cost of the home, which came to $120,000 plus $10,000 in her attorney fees. Dan paid $50,000 toward the house and stopped, claiming that Wendi defrauded him. He also didn't pay the attorney fees.
Wendi Adelson allege in this motion to enforce the marital settlement agreement.
Require the former husband to immediately transfer to the former wife the remaining amount due to her.
So she's saying he hasn't paid up.
Correct.
He only paid 2 months of around $800 monthly child support out of the 8 months that had passed. Why only 2 months of a child support over an 8-month time frame? It was known that Dan had $500,000 in a Charles Schwab account in his name, so he had the money to pay off Wendi for her share of the house. Instead, he forced Wendi's attorney to seek a judgment against him to make him pay. At one point, Wendi's lawyer had to recuse herself in order to be a witness against Dan, because you can't be a lawyer and a witness at the same time. So Wendi had to find another attorney.
And it was the last one that he filed. I believe it was in May, I believe, where he said that where he became very personal to me, which occasionally happens. It doesn't usually happen with professional people, so I was surprised. But he became very personal towards me and said that I had committed fraud and that I should be disbarred based upon what had happened. At that point in time, I knew that I was going to actually have to be a witness now in this case. And as a witness, you can't be a witness and a lawyer representing your client. So I knew that I had to withdraw. So I withdrew so that I could testify in the case that was going to come up. And I sought a new counsel for Ms. Adelson at that point.
Dan tried a strategy to force Wendi to be her own attorney by interviewing all the attorneys he could find in Tallahassee with no intention of hiring them. That way, these attorneys would have to be disqualified to be her attorney based on conflict of interest. Wendi rented a home 15 minutes away from Dan so she could be with her children. Their marriage settlement was ultimately ordinary and conventional. Dan discovered he was not going to get his own way anymore.
It was very fair. It was measured. I say that favorable only because he was asking for things that would have made it unfavorable and that were unusual requests. And at the end of the day, he gave up on those, and they got a very typical marital settlement agreement.
Wendi didn't actually want to live with her family if she had relocated to Miami. She was a 35-year-old woman who wanted to live with her children in their own dwelling. She found it difficult to face her family to tell them this.
And then you say, for the chance to save face with my family and to be given an opportunity I don't actually want, to live with them in South Florida. That's what you said, right?
Dan complained Wendi did not give him all the Skype calls he wanted with the children.
In the marriage settlement agreement, was she required to have the boys available for video calls?
No.
One day, while Dan was having a Skype conversation with the children, he overheard Donna calling him stupid. The kids also told him that Donna hated him because he kept her away from her little sunshines.
Danny made it clear to me that Donna did not like him. He would do a lot of Skype with the children, and one time, one of the sons said, "Grandma called you stupid."
So Dan filed a motion for Donna to only have supervised visits with the children.
Then, in March 2014, Markel launched an offensive on another front, the mother-in-law. In court papers, he demanded that Donna, Wendi's mom, stop having unsupervised visits with his kids after they told him, "Grandma says you're stupid," and "Grandma says she hates you."
Wendi's lawyer said nothing would likely have come of it, as judges do not usually take the testimony of children.
Would that have resulted in any sort of relief preventing my client from having any sort of unsupervised time with the grandchildren?
No. It's not possible. And I told Wendi that.
Okay. Now,
they both dated other people. Dan dated Amy Altler, a law professor at NYU. Wendi dated a social worker professor, Jeff Lacasse, at FSU. In the meantime, Dan still had a few tricks up his sleeve. He had gotten a new lawyer that was going to deliver a bombshell in the divorce proceedings. He claimed there was a $500,000 inheritance Wendi failed to disclose in the divorce documents.
The latest claim was that she had concealed $500,000 in assets, on top of having the family heirloom and other things that he felt were unreasonable. And he had claimed to Maya and to Alex, apparently, that there was something that big that he was going to drop a bomb on her in the next week. A legal bomb that would discredit her statements, particularly with regard to financial matters.
Dan was extremely clueless or dense at what the Adelsons thought of him.
Danny felt like he was okay with Charlie at the beginning, and then over time he felt like he wasn't anymore. And I think the same thing. He felt like he was fine with her parents, and then all of a sudden they flipped on him. He was very confused about it. And I think over time, when he was hearing some of the things that she had passed along to colleagues, who then started looking at him funny, he realized that her family members may be thinking the same things. And I don't know exactly what she was telling them, but he was painted as not a nice person.
When Dan got joint custody of the children, the Adelsons were shocked because they fully expected Wendi to get primary custody, as is customary. As long as Dan had the kids in Tallahassee, Wendi was forced to live there to be with them. The Adelsons looked for ways to achieve full custody. Her family offered to pay for weekly plane tickets so Dan could visit his boys in Miami, which he didn't take them up on. They offered to pay him $1 million for full custody, which he refused. With no other options left, Donna and brother Charlie decided to put a hit on Dan. Charlie had checked into this in the summer of 2013, but nothing came of it until the following year. On that fateful day, Dan was on a phone call with his kid's teacher as he pulled up onto his driveway. He had just gotten back from the gym and dropping off the kids at daycare. In the garage, he told the teacher to hold on a second because he just saw someone in his driveway. The teacher heard a grunt, some voices, and then labored breathing on the phone. Fearing Dan had a heart attack, he prodded Dan if he was all right, and after getting no response, he called 911. In the meantime, the neighbor next door heard some loud noises and looked out his window at Dan's house. He saw a silver-green Prius backing out of Dan's driveway and hightailed out. He walked over to Dan's garage, found him bloody, and called 911. The dispatcher got confused and sent a lone officer as if it was a routine call and did not send an ambulance. After the lone officer showed up and assessed the damage, he got things moving, but this delayed Dan from getting to the hospital. He died the next day. Eventually, police concluded Donna and Charlie were behind the contract hit on Dan. I'm not going to go into the convoluted explanation of how the two hitmen and Charlie's middleman girlfriend were caught. Suffice to say, Donna and Charlie were behind it. When it became clear that the police were investigating them, it took its toll on their health. Charlie was irritable, couldn't sleep, and took Xanax. Donna was weepy, anxious, and worried. She felt like Dan was haunting them from the grave.
Was she crying when you saw her?
At a point in time, yes.
And did Charlie Adelson advise you that she was taking painkillers for stress during that time frame?
Yes.
And was there a time when you were on the balcony of Donna Adelson's residence and she made a statement to you about Dan Markel?
We were speaking about Dan because the case was such a big thing at that time, yes.
Okay, and what was the statement she made?
Well, her life was crumbling down in her family's life, so she said everything felt like Dan was haunting her from the grave or them, I don't know, whatever it says there.
She feels like Dan's back from the grave, like haunting her or something.
In reference to that, yes. Yeah.
No further questions?
Jeff Lacasse, Wendy's ex-boyfriend, provided a treasure trove of information on the case, including his correct guess that Charlie was most likely behind this. I was very amazed, however, how Jeff's chart came out. He comes up Gemini rising. I had guessed that rising sign because he's such a talker. He's an interrogator's dream. But I notice he comes up with Saturn conjunct his ascendant, just like Dan, who also came up Gemini rising. In fact, both have their sun in Libra. Both have their Pluto in Libra in the 5th. Dan was obsessed with his children, and Jeff was obsessed with Wendi, his girlfriend. Looking at Wendy's chart, with Aries rising and her ruler in Aries conjunct her ascendant, you would think this would be the most independent person in the world. But no, apparently those planets in the 12th, plus her moon and Venus in Pisces, swamped out her chart. Jeff Lacasse said Wendi was fragile, a basket case, given to crying over the simplest things.
We have a huge fight, and she's a very fragile person. I've been keeping her shit together for 9 months, and it's been a very unhealthy relationship. She really can't do life very well. It's kind of sad. And she gets by being really attractive and all this kind of stuff, but day-to-day life, she's independent. She needs a whole lot of help.
Wendi is childlike.
But one of the reasons I went with her is she's very childlike, very much like a 13-year-old girl. I don't know if she could have handled it on her own. I had to do an awful lot of things for her. Her parents, if you investigated, you've probably seen that. I mean, she needs to be taken care of. She's such a fragile person. When she would travel to Miami, her mom would drive or fly up here and then go down with her every single time.
She didn't travel on her own?
No. It's real weird. And at first I thought, what overbearing parents? And then over time I'm like, oh, I don't want her to go on spring break by herself either. She's won't be able to handle it. She'll lose her shit, you know?
Lacasse said she was infantilized by her family.
The family is so unhealthily enmeshed, so completely enmeshed, that Wendi is not really an adult. When she drives to South Florida, every single time those two parents drive up here and drive with her down. They don't trust her to drive from Tallahassee to Miami. They're just, it's not a normal family. It's not like she's a 35-year-old that has 2 kids and come down and see us. It's complete enmeshment. It's a matter of they infantilized her. She's considered the baby still. She's 35 years old.
Wendi drinks.
It's actually a very manipulative person, pathological liar. Wendi was an alcoholic while I was with her. She drank her dinner most nights. Extremely fragile, extremely depressed. Many, many nights sitting, hated Tallahassee so much that I thought we're a bunch of country bumpkins and we liked Tallahassee because she's from Miami. Didn't hide that fact. Thought it was bizarre that I moved here from Phoenix. And the 2 conversations that we had every single day for 9 months were, Danny is an evil monster. Tallahassee is the worst place in the world to live, and I can't believe I got stuck here because of Danny Markel. And she was obsessed with those 2 concepts. So I got really tired of hearing that, but I heard that every day for 9 months. Just spinning out of control. And she wasn't that controlled to begin with, but it was getting worse. Her drinking was really increasing in April. And she had times where she's just losing her mind. I mean, with the kids in the house, drinking a bottle and a half of wine by herself, falling down in the bathroom, bruises. I flew to a trip to Chicago when I came back. I had to go right from the airport to the house because she was just doing so poorly. So she was just not well.
Wendi plays the victim.
Wendi's very manipulative in that she plays the victim very, very easily. Whenever we got into a confrontation, for me, very sensitive that I work with DV victims, more they've been raped as a social worker, all that kind of stuff. So I'm also a sensitive Mr. Rogers kind of guy. So it's a very, easy way to manipulate me, or Markel for that matter. But she just wasn't stable even in the fall. And able to cover it up here or there. One of these people, the first 100 hours you spend with her, you think she's amazing. 101 on, you're like, shit, what did I get myself into here? This person's kind of crazy.
Wendi appeared to have little psychological fortitude.
She was deeply troubled. She was on psychiatric medications, and in March she decided to come off of those.
March of 14?
March 14th. Spring break immocalee, actually. That's when she went off. And this will make sense to why this matters. I don't want to give you BS or all that information, but she's already a sensitive person, so much that, you couldn't say to her, like, hey, I'd appreciate it if you'd be a little more considerate to me. You're being kind of, she'd break down crying for 2 hours. She would throw a tantrum. I've never seen anything like it. Anybody I've ever dated, I've dated some pretty crazy women. So, but then when she went up there, so her eyes, it went from being fragile to being, she had no resilience. She would just melt down in an absolute second.
For over what?
Anything. Any kind of criticism.
Oh, if you had given her criticism.
Or anybody did. Anything negative. I've seen her lose her shit over, cake going bad in the oven. And she's devastated for 6 hours. This was in the spring. So this was like the state she was in as we approached the time of the crime. So I'll skip the whole thing where we did. She decompensated in a way that I've never seen an adult do before. She ended up in the fetal position, sobbing like a 3-year-old.
If there's one word to describe Wendi, it would be dependency. People are only too willing to give aid and charity to Wendi, and she encourages it.
Did you observe that Wendi played a bit of a damsel in distress, in your opinion, in the divorce?
Yes, I think that's a good way to describe it.
She has it down to a science where she can get other people to handle her problems. She gloms onto people like a crutch. First it was her parents, then it was Dan, then it was Jeff. Each of these people got to see the other side of Wendi, the dependent, pathetic, childlike, needy individual. From her parents, she parlayed that dependency on Dan, only too willing to surrender her welfare to him. But the difference between these 2 dominating influences in her life was that her parents operated in her best interests. Dan operated in his own best interests.
Yeah. So I said, okay. One thing about Wendi is this is where I worry about the crime. She's very easily influenced. She doesn't have much of a sense of self. When she was with Danny, she kind of became Danny's extension of Danny, attached herself to him. She doesn't want to be controlled, but she does want to be controlled. I mean, she into a lot of sex stuff and things where she wants to be told what to do. And one of the things I worry about is that somebody came up with this idea and she went along with it because she doesn't know how to say no. She hates confrontation, things like that. So
when you have so many planets in the 12th house, you may find yourself in a trapped existence. You want out, but you're afraid to leave the situation you have and go off on your own. You get lulled into the security of the miserable situation, but you're just doing time. Your life is passing you by.
She felt trapped. I know she felt trapped. Here.
Dan had an interesting take on Wendi. While others are falling all over themselves trying to help out poor invalid Wendi, Dan was not so affected. When they drove to her parents' house to Miami, Dan had Wendi drive the entire trip by herself while he worked on his laptop. He told her not to say a word so as not to disturb his concentration. Not only did he believe Wendi was up to the task, he didn't even supervise her driving. Here she had his life in her hands. She was behind the wheel, yet he was totally unconcerned.
They would drive from here to Miami as a family. Oh, this is before they had kids even, but even as a family, both. Danny would work on his computer, he had one of those converters so he could plug your laptop in. Wendi was required to drive. And Markel's rule was, you may not speak. Tallahassee to Miami.
From Tallahassee to Miami.
And she said she would be like, Dick, I'm working. He's a total control freak, emotionally abusive, controlled the finances, just ran her shit. And I don't know if he hit her or not, but I can tell you, if you just raise your voice to her like that, she flinches like she's got her ass kicked yesterday.
The $1 million job offer Wendi got from the partnership that sued drug companies was suspicious at best. There is another video on YouTube that states one partner of the law firm wanted her to come aboard because of a romantic interest in her, but the other partners voted her down. It is unlikely she qualified for a powerhouse job like this, considering her lightweight background as an immigration attorney, which is not even the firm's specialty. $1 million salary to start is more likely for a hard-hitting, litigating trial lawyer. She wanted to use the job offer as clout for the relocation petition. She said in the filings she had a job offer, not the job itself. The job was offered in January of 2013, but the judge didn't render a decision until June. There were 5 months in between she could have taken the job, if it was legit, but she didn't. By the time of their divorce, Wendi was drinking, miserable, and had no affection from Dan. This from a man she lowered herself to marry. She probably spared no details to her family on what a god-awful husband Dan turned out to be. When Wendi couldn't relocate the children and was forced to live in Tallahassee, that was the last straw. She would never get out of Tallahassee. Dan won again. It seemed so unfair. She had sacrificed enough. Her family was incensed. They would come to her rescue as they always did. In the meantime, she stood on the sidelines, not getting involved in any contract hit. Let her family do the dirty work and take all the risk. There is a video on YouTube about a phone call Donna had with Charlie while he was in jail awaiting trial. Charlie asked about Wendi. Donna said she had not yet connected with Wendi, but she lied. Donna didn't have the heart to tell Charlie that Wendi never asked about him. Dan dropped out of the attorney field 3 years after working as one. He obviously didn't like the job. But was Dan pulling a bait and switch here? Did he hold out on quitting the law profession long enough to score himself a bride, and then spring the professor aspiration on her later when they became close? It should be noted Dan Markel may have signed up Wendi for the university position because small-town Tallahassee does not have the big city opportunities of Miami. Maybe connections are necessary to get a job, especially if you're an out-of-towner. Dan himself may have had connections to get his job.
I mean, I just wondered, I never quite understood why they landed here, from everything I've heard.
So he wanted to be a full-time professor, and he had some friends here who lived here before me and had talked to them as well, and so FSU became the option.
Dan's chart shows a stellium of planets in the fifth. No wonder the children were his world. Now, I have seen the word pretentious associated with Dan on more than one occasion. For example,
both Dan and Wendi have been described as charismatic, but Wendi was able to bring Dan out of a serious and at times pretentious shell.
pretentiousness is an attempt to impress people with your own self-importance. In Dan's case, he wants you to know what an academic intellectual he is.
So the paper is about the tissue connecting democratic citizenship with retributive justice. And the argument is that contrary to some of the leading criminal law theories,
An interesting choice of words. The tissue connecting democratic citizenship for retributive justice. It's not words I would string together, and all we learn from this is that Dan is no wordsmith. This is pretentiousness, a clumsy attempt to impress people with his own intellectual prowess and expecting to be acknowledged for it.
it's an honor to be here and share some thoughts with you about this big project that I've been.
Let's talk about retributive justice and the demands of a democratic citizenship. There's a mouthful. Retributive justice simply means punishing an offender in accordance with his crime. This is just common sense, isn't it? So this title might be reduced to Common Sense Justice. Dan was a believer in penalizing as opposed to rehab. Perhaps this was where his speech was going. In any case, that's what Dan does. He finds words people never heard of, which makes him look brilliant because they don't understand what he's saying, and people start touting him as a rising star.
He was a gifted young man. Gifted.
Donald Wider, former dean of the FSU Law School, says the intense and driven Markel was a superstar.
Our second speaker is Dan Markel.
A renowned scholar who commanded attention at prestigious legal seminars around the country.
But the sentencing issue is distinct from the criminalization question.
What Dan didn't get in life, he got in death through hype. This is at least one reason Dan wasn't too popular, at least among his colleagues, because I'm sure they see themselves as academic intellectuals as well, and they don't need it shoved in their faces that he's smarter than they are.
You must have heard. Don't want to speak ill of the dead. He wasn't well liked. It's bizarre to open up the paper and see all these comments about how a great guy he was. I know one person in my social circle, Alan Grossman, that was reasonably friendly with him. Everyone else does that kind of stuff.
How do you know Al?
But I've never. Danny can be crass, and I can see how he can come across as condescending. He was just a typical condescending Harvard nerdy type person when I first met him. Like bow tie wearing, and he would rub people the wrong way because he was very, very highfalutin, used big words. He was very confident in his intelligence, but it came across as arrogant.
Okay.
He came across as arrogant to many people. Over time, he mellowed, especially after Wendi and especially with the boys. He mellowed. He's like, okay, everything doesn't have to be so put in place and nothing's so perfect, and he just matured. And
She was meeting her parents. She said last time that it was so awkward because it went so badly because they all hated Danny. Charlie Yeah, her parents hated Danny.
Do you know why?
He isn't. In person, he is so arrogant. He is so unlikable. He would just talk down to people. He was one of these Harvard guys.
Okay.
And it was just like, when I met him in that awkward meeting, I was early. I was late. He was early, and we met for the first time. He insulted me 3-4 times in 10 sentences, just in subtle, like, haughty, snobby kind of ways. Like, oh, are you a lawyer? You know, and just little comments here and there, you know. So he was passive aggressive about it. He wasn't in your face, he wasn't yelling, but he insulted. He would just tell you, say you're stupid.
Okay.
I mean, that's just how he talked. He thought he should do.
He's basically subtly insulting you the entire conversation.
Yeah, he did. I mean, as far as Wendi and him.
This is why Donna and Wendi kept referring to Dan as gibbers. It stands for gibberish.
A jackass.
Yes.
A religious extremist.
Yes.
What about gibbers? She calls him gibbers?
Yeah, gibbers is not a bad name.
I want to thank a commenter for suggesting doing a video on this. I had a superficial knowledge of what this case was all about, originally learning about it years ago from one of those news magazine shows such as 2020. But when I delved into it, I was amazed at how much backstory there was to this. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.